It's the old atmosphere, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very definitely. Well, so do you recognize anything around you?
Just the sky.
It's a few years since you were here, isn't it?
Oh, it's an awfully long time now when I think of it. What's that?
Can you see the initials?
I do, yes.
TC, 27th of the first 28 days.
That's extraordinary.
It's presumably the man who was building the runway.
Yes.
In 1939, at the outbreak of World War II, there were 3 airfields in Northern Ireland. By the end of the war, there were 26. The country's location was crucial to the air war. Thousands of pilots, aircrew, and technicians came from every Allied nation. Some to train and prepare their aircraft for the war in Europe, and others to fight the Battle of the Atlantic. For many, it would be their final resting place. Killed not in action, but in accidents. America used Northern Ireland as a springboard for the final push to victory over Hitler. A sleepy province changed forever, witnessing tales of courage, romance, tragedy, and loss.
We lay the wreath every year simply because Cecil feels he's got to keep Stanley, Cecil's brother. We've got to keep remembering him. We do that, and it just makes him feel that he's not forgetting Stanley, I suppose.
Everybody wanted to go into the Air Force at the time. And my younger brother, I knew he was going to join. And a few weeks later, he and a couple of his friends, they all went and joined together. And the post came one morning, and there was a letter from me and a letter from my brother, and we were called up then, both of us at the same time.
It sort of came on you rather gradually that you realized, see, the first part of the war was really, they called it the dummy war. There was no fighting going on, and it was just, life was normal except for all the precautions that were taken.
I was only a child before the war started. I was 14 when the war broke out, and I still have the little diary where I wrote in little schoolgirl handwriting, today, war broke out. This is very exciting. I've never been in a war before. God, I didn't know what war was like.
This is a Tiger Moth, the first aeroplane I ever flew. And there's no self-starter. You have to, well, I won't do it now, but you're in the cockpit, and there's somebody here with his hands on the thing, and you call out contact. You switch on the ignition, and he goes whoof like that, and jumps back, and it starts. It was agreed round about Christmas, 1939, that we'd all go and do something. I went up to Clifton Street to the RAF recruiting office and said I would like to volunteer to be an RAF pilot. So the next thing you knew, I was in the Air Force. You see, I went to a Spitfire squadron, which was 504, and I was posted to 54 Squadron, the City of London squadron. The whole squadron, lock, stock and barrel, was sent out to Darwin in Australia.
Well, I came over here with my mother, who married an Ulster Presbyterian. I came from Brighton, which was a very, very different place. And I found Belfast very strict. And I suppose about 15 when I first met Ian. Took me to the pictures. That was it. He was my first boyfriend.
Well, I was sort of her first babysitter, in fact, almost.
Helped me with my homework. I went to Richmond Lodge for a year. But then the war came when I was 16, and Belfast came alive. I was sad when he went away to war, but not sad enough to wait for him till he came home. Oh, well, we were very close at that time. And he, as I say, he was my boyfriend. He had my photograph.
Yes.
And,
I had her photograph sellotaped into the back of my logbook. It's still in the logbook.
Northern Ireland had its first direct experience of the war with the Blitz of 1941. "200 Heinkel bombers blasted the city. 984 people were killed. Thousands made homeless. The Irish Free State had chosen neutrality. Northern Ireland briefly became a frontline target for Nazi aggression.
The first phase, U-boats in operation, only a dozen or so. Their aim, to seal the entrances to the English Channel and the North Sea. Coastal Command at this point has only 19 squadrons, all inadequately equipped.
On lots of occasions, I was the first person on the crew to sight the U-boat or any target on the sea. And that's how I got that nickname, Hawkeye.
To protect the convoy lanes and the Lend-Lease cargo streaming over them, Coastal begins to operate from Iceland, Northern Ireland and west of England, and forces the enemy farther out into the Atlantic. Submarine strength, 150 U-boats.
The main menace was the German U-boat because it was sinking convoys coming from America and coming from south from Australia and so forth with food. And they were trying to starve the country out.
Coastal institutes very long-range aircraft, and from here on, the air battle against the U-boat is offensive rather than defensive. Periscope. Lethal bulk rising from the sea. This is the enemy.
We were the only long-range Liberator squadron in the Air Force at that time, and we had to go out and look after these convoys, escort them for hours. We used to attack at a height of about 50 feet above the water, and we'd know a bomb site or anything. It was all done by the number 1 Mark 1 eyeball.
Found a submarine one day. We attacked it. All I knew was that the stern of it came up to about 45 degrees out of the water, and it disappeared. We listened on these sono buoys, as they called them, where you could hear what was going on underwater. We listened on those. I could hear hammering and very, very loud, clear hammering, as though someone was hitting a pipe with a hammer, and that was the last we heard of it. We couldn't claim having destroyed it because there's been no evidence that it had been destroyed. Long after that, when the war ended, the squadron got a letter to say that on the such and such a date, a submarine attack had taken place with aircraft so-and-so, and it was now confirmed as destroyed. Ages afterwards, after I'd been demobbed, I got a letter from a solicitor in Hamburg acting for the parents of the captain of this submarine. The captain of the submarine's mother felt that possibly her son had been injured and had lost his memory and was still alive somewhere. So I wrote back. I thought it was an odd thing that the Air Force would have forwarded a letter to me at my home address. Anyhow, I said that if it was any consolation, all I could say was that he didn't suffer and that there was no possibility that he could be alive. A letter came through from the mother, saying, a very nice letter saying thanks for the information and hoped that the world wouldn't go mad again and such things would never ever happen, which was rather nice. A nice ending to it.
As the Battle of the Atlantic intensified, two aircraft became essential. The short Sunderland was made in Belfast. Later, America, though not yet in the war, supplied the Royal Air Force with the PBY Catalina. These flying boats had exceptionally long range and were used for anti-submarine patrols and air-sea rescue missions. The Irish weather claimed a heavy toll, as many aircrew were killed in crashes as in combat. The tranquil Fermanagh Lakes became location for one of the most ambitious undertakings of the war. The lakes, with their myriad of small islands, were treacherous for the operation of flying boats. But on the most westerly edge of the British Isles, they were ideally placed for a base to protect the Atlantic convoy routes. Castle Archdale and Killadees on Lough Erne saw a huge influx of pilots, aircrew, ground staff and radio operators. The bases became home to thousands of servicemen and women from throughout the Allied nations.
This area of concrete here was completely different when we worked here during the war. The area at the back was a slipway where the bogies were two big rubber wheels. They were let out into the water by a tractor. The Sunderlands and Catalinas were then floated in on the top of them. They were trailed up here and brought up, parked around the place to be repaired. There was two hangars over there, or maybe three, and two hangars over here.
We worked in the castle signals office on the top of the castle, and we were monitoring the bands for the aircraft out in the Atlantic, and it had also a little box on top where we did duty with a radio telephone, worked the aircraft coming into land, and they needed a clearance, and we had an Aldous lamp there to signal them. We did have a little stove in the middle of the hut. We were given a ration of coal and a ration of coke, and on occasions we ran out of that, and I and my other Kiwi cobber raided the dump one night and got caught in the dump and had to escape through the wire and hid under a culvert somewhere down in the camp there. And anyway, we made away with our loot. And so it was a bit difficult in the wintertime.
Right, Lynn, this is the entrance to Castle Archdale. And what exactly did you do here?
Oh, I was teleprinted to leftmost here.
I see. And what
And I
condition?
served with the Canadian. I was on loan to the Canadian squadrons.
Oh, yes. That was what,
422, 423 squadron.
Yes. And there were,
RCAF.
yeah, there were Catalinas and Sunderlands here.
Oh,
weren't
yes.
There was time, yes, I know.
And it was
yeah.
quite a busy year.
yeah.
We were quite busy here.
Yeah. And a pleasant place to be?
Very pleasant. This place we are here was the officers' accommodation. I can't ever remember being invited here because I was only a wife. We used to do a lot of things that we weren't supposed to do, i.e. cut the wire so as we could creep out. We used to nip out and away down to the village. When we went out on the cycle runs out from Castle Archdale, we used to go out the country lane, way out through the country lane, going towards Petticoat. There used to be farms, you know, the farms all out there. What you've got to understand is, once we went across from Petticoat, we were in Southern Ireland, and that was definitely out of bounds to us. We cycled away along this lane. We got to this lovely flat piece, threw the bikes down, and the boy said, I think there's a wee fishing village down there somewhere. We'll see if we can get down to it. Leave the bikes here, nobody will take the bikes. All of a sudden, one shouts, lie down, flat. What are we going to lie down flat for? Shh, listen. And I couldn't hear nothing. And I heard the big fella turn around and say, there's Jerry's down there. I said, what? There's Jerry down there. They're speaking German. And I said, sprechen die Deutsch? And of course I got, come on the bikes. And away we went. Well, that was the night that I think there was 2 of the aircraft went out. After we got back, the boys had to report, you see, what they'd found. They said that it was submarine being refueled.
I was trained on Catalinas, and I eventually came here as an instructor. As an aircraft, the Catalina flew like an old cow. It was very heavy on the controls, but you got used to that, and there was a very good automatic pilot in it. We carried 6 250-pound Torpex depth charges, and we would go out on 18-hour patrols looking for submarines. Oh, this is interesting. There were 784 U-boats sunk out of 1,162.
That was that big funeral. What's the whole of the crew, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's up at Urbanstown. There was details there, the crashes on Shorey Hill and so forth. Now this is what's called the Donegal corridor, coming out from Lough Erne here and going out. We were allowed to fly out because the Republic or the Free State actually start just here. We were allowed to go out there. And it was organised through De Valera.
Didn't he look like De Valera?
Well, he is De Valera.
Excuse me.
It was from Killidees that Bismarck was sighted. Oh, there he is.
209 and 240.
That's he was called Bismarck Briggs after all that. And he had an American with him, Ensign Leonard Tuck. That's right, Tuck Smith from, his nickname was Tuck. He was the co-pilot, and he was the one who actually spotted the ship.
I was sent over here along with 17 other American pilots to assist the Royal Air Force in transitioning into PBY Catalina aircraft. These were new aircraft that they were getting. We were sent over for the sole purposes of checking them out in them and showing them what button to push, and this type of thing. Our president knew what the world needed and doing his best to help within the confines of the laws we had. The night of 25th of May, 41, 2:30 in the morning, we were assigned to go out and look for the Bismarck. And the Bismarck had sunk the hood, and we were sent out to look for it. And this is where we departed from. Weather wasn't very good that night. Rainy, cloudy, low ceilings, and I'll never forget it. Shortly after we were airborne, we climbed up 2,500 feet, took departure. 2:30 in the morning, no sooner than we got there, one of us spotted this thing on the horizon, and so I took over the controls. And it wasn't 10 minutes later, lo and behold, there it was. It was happenstance that I happened to see it first at all. We stayed there for additional 4 or 5 hours and came home. The only fun part of the day was when we got home. Those days when a pilot had done well on a mission, you got to buzz the aerodrome. And I'll never forget, Dennis took over. We were staying in Killidees. I think he almost took the roof off. It's what we used to call flat hatting. Another day at the office.
When you think back that it's since, what, 1943, 44, since there were Catalinas here. There were Catalinas and Sunderlands both here. In fact, I was, after I'd finished my tour of operations, I was up here instructing on both Catalinas and Sunderlands, because I could do both aircraft. Sunderland's 33 tons, and that's a big airplane. There was one crew went down just off Clare Island, down Blue Bay. They're buried in Irvingtown, Frankie Page's crew. But you see a lot of the headstones of fellas that were killed here, like Canadians. There's one he buried down behind the church in Irvingtown, Hebington. He was killed on one that crashed here at Troy. He was doing, the aircraft was doing fighter affiliation with the Beaufighter. And when the Beaufighter went past, he would come right around on his tail. He was chasing him around right on the wingtip. His engineer warned him. He said, "You're banking too steep." He said, "You'll lose her." He said, "Oh, no, he's plenty of speed." But he did. He got into a side slip, and the only way out is nose down and then round out of it. And when he rounded out, he's too low. He hit the ground. But there were 2 killed. Hebington was one of them. He was one of the Canadians. The other fellow was a RAF lad. But they're buried there in Irvingtown.
To come back after 63 years, it's a very poignant occasion. I remember being the pallbearer for my friend, and his tragic death upset our whole little group, and we welded together in one sort of unit, and it took us weeks to get over it. So to come back after all this time, it's quite an event for me, really. It's a sad occasion, but it's a great privilege to be able to come back.
Across the country, on the County Down coast, a very different base had become operational. Ballyhalbert was a small fighter station. established to protect Belfast and its industries from further Nazi attack. It grew to become a centre training fighter pilots for battle in Spitfires and Hurricanes.
Where'd you get that? Isn't that a good one? Well, well, well. That's myself, of course. When I went to Salisbury, I joined the 504 Squadron, and we were there for only 3 or 4 weeks. And the adjutant said to me one morning, "How would you like to go back to Northern Ireland?" And I said, "I don't particularly want to go back to Northern Ireland now, having gone through all." I was very keen to get into the action, naturally, like everybody else. And he said, "Well, I'm afraid in a couple of days you're leaving here in charge of the advance party, and you're going to Ballyhalbert." It was a brand new aerodrome, very few people about. Most of all, we were training for more sterling work.
That's the firing range.
Yes. See, with the Spitfire, we could land very quickly.
Yes.
And take off very quickly.
Yes. Well,
so that
the whole
wasn't a
idea
great
and the
problem.
thing, yeah.
The same with the Hurricane. They were very, very alike. I came to get everything ready for the squadron arriving.
Right.
And
but then disaster struck.
they call
Dreadful
it,
thing.
the locals here call it the Battle of Ballyhalbert.
Weather was the main problem, wasn't it?
The wind. I was with the group captain in the top of the tower, waiting for the squadron to come in. There were 22 of them. They came round in lovely formation. The CO came in first, which was right across the gale. And with difficulty, he kept his aircraft going straight and landed successfully. The same happened then with the flight commanders. They came in and did the same. Then the next fellow coming in, the wind caught the flaps and the aeroplane went straight into the swamp. Gradually, we got them all down. It was a very sad day with so many airplanes completely destroyed.
Well, hey, look at this.
I say.
There's a party here already.
Uh-huh.
Well, isn't that lovely? Shall we
Shall
sit
we
there?
have a seat?
Let's have a seat.
Right.
That's what it's sitting here for, by the look of things. You go around that side and I'll sit here.
Right.
Now, we can have a good look at the airfield from here and enjoy ourselves with a little drink. So
Couldn't be better.
we'll take a good look at the airfield because we'll never get a better view of it.
No, we never will. Never.
Well, could you kid yourself that you were in the past, looking around you? Does it seem the same as it did before?
I've never been quite so high up without being in an airplane before.
There we are.
Oh, thank you.
Just a spot,
Lovely.
just a spot in it. Well, what should we drink to?
Oh,
I think we'll have a drink to olden days, the fact that we're still here.
yes.
Right, cheers.
Cheers.
A black day. For this afternoon, the squadron lost one of its soundest and most popular pilots, Pilot Officer W.B. McManus, Royal Canadian Air Force, in an accident, the cause of which is at present a mystery. Pilot Officer McManus was considerably overdue, flying a Spitfire 2A back from St. Angelo. Subsequently, it was reported that a Spitfire had crashed and was burned out at Rochlin, near Lurgan, and there seems no doubt that the pilot who was killed was P.O. McManus. That was a sad one.
Oh, that was very sad. I had only left the squadron a very short time before, and I was very sorry when it happened. But this particular aeroplane was one of those Spitfires which were donated to the Royal Air Force by the Belfast Telegraph Fund. There were, I think, 16 altogether aircraft presented by the fund, and it was sad that this, which was the Down Spitfire, was lost in County Down.
In 1943, Ballyhalbert was a home away from home for the stateless Polish Air Force recovering from frontline action.
That's all my friends. That man there. He got bullet in his head at the back. 1940, I think it was. He was a gunner, and he first time he flew, and they wouldn't let him fly again. You know, unfortunately, you know, whatever happened, I don't know, he couldn't take it. And the rest of them, every one of them from the same time as myself, from the same, some of them even from some street here, you know, good friends of mine. And that's me there. See how young I was.
We heard that they were very wild, but now we must have got the pick of the bunch, because these fellas were very nice now. Because we heard before they came, they're very wild, and everybody was sort of afraid of them.
I was in Ballyhalbert 42. That was 314 Squadron. Used to be air gunner like in the tail, right? And they used to go at the bottom. You had to be prepared for anything. The squadron moved to Ballyhalbert for what we call the rest. We used to say we were licking our wounds, because that was the expression. We had quite a number of people being shot down. In fact, there are 3 squadron commanders shot down. The people of the old caliber, we call them. General Sosnowski came visiting us, and decorations of some of the pilots who were dead, who should be decorated, with the highest military decoration, what we call the Polish Victoria Cross, Virtute Militari. Yes, little me, yes, the general himself, over here. On the day of visit of the General Sosnowski, I was trying to impress the general, with different information, which we had learned prior to this, what we call the battle formation. We were quite good flying in formation anyway, because this was also perhaps a step forward to flying in the battle formation, which was always line abreast, with 3/4. And the fourth was flying more or less in the formation, but if it was a battle formation, the distance was very specific, and another 4 was on the right, another section was on the left. And this, as I say, Germans knew that these are the poles, so they tried to avoid us. We had to look for them. Yeah? The first thing which I said to my pilots always, treat the Spitfire like the young girl, nicely and gently. And in return, you get what you wanted. That was my lesson number 1, as far as Spitfires are concerned. I think maybe because of that, my nickname Honey was also appropriate. And anyway, that's another story.
The police, all they were great lads. And I told you about the snow. When the snow came, they started to draw different designs in the snow. They were marvellous. But God help them, they were wild pilots. I know there was a war going on, but there was people being killed and all that. But they used to dive bomb around the airport. The next thing you'd hear a crash. God help them. It was unnecessary.
We flew and taught the people in one of the flights. We have 2 accidents, in fact. On one of the flights, three people got killed over the hills because of the weather.
I have said not once, but many times, that I have seen war and that I hate war. I say that again and again. I hope the United States will keep out of this war. I believe that it will. And I give you assurance and reassurance that every effort of your government will be directed toward that end.
American P-47, Thunderbolts, fresh from the hands of the aviation workers who built them. They're headed now for a secret port of embarkation, a secret jumping-off place for the mounting battle of Germany. They'll cross the ocean by convoy, but they'll reach our air bases on Britain in the same perfect state in which they left the final testing line at home. Dismantled, greased, weatherproof, crated, yes, by hands skilled and trained. The precious man-hours sweated into these flying weapons will be perfectly guarded.
I remember seeing a movie, it was a propaganda movie called The Lion Has Wings. And we went to the movie theater to see this movie, and it was purely propaganda. They were showing, I think we had at that time in the Royal Air Force about 3 Spitfires, but the fellow in this, the moderator was talking like, boy, we had all kinds of them, and he kept saying, we are prepared for whatever comes, you know, which was baloney. and I think most of us had mixed emotions, you know, having known veterans of the First World War and what they went through, an aversion to having another war. But I think once we got into it, we all felt, and the Americans felt the same way, that we got to see this thing through, you know.
The United States entered the war in December 1941. Northern Ireland was strategically placed to become America's staging post. In one of the biggest transportation endeavors of the war, convoys brought aircraft across the Atlantic to Belfast to be reassembled, test flown, and made battle ready. Thousands of American troops were billeted in towns and villages throughout the country. They were to protect Northern Ireland in the event of Nazi invasion and to make final preparations before being shipped to the conflict in Europe. Aircraft were freighted, flown, and hauled to a secret location, one of America's biggest bases outside the United States, Langford Lodge, County Antrim, on the shores of Lough Neagh. Langford, a stately home, was requisitioned for a base set up and run by the Lockheed Overseas Corporation. It employed 7,000 civilian and military personnel.
I know it was built because of the contract that Lockheed had with the Army Air Force. At the time, it was the Army Air Force, not the Air Force itself. And it was built to receive and service the planes as they arrived from the States. We arrived in probably the biggest convoy that the UK at that time. We were on a ship that carried all Lockheed supplies. And they brought us back to Langford Lodge, where all the mud was. The place was really muddy. We still had a lot of building to do. When we got there, the place was pretty damp. All the bedclothes were wet, actually. But we soon took care of that. I was in the instrument group, and the B-24s were parked right on the runway. A lot of B-24s when I first got there. I always remembered Langford Lodge, you know, the base, and coming here as a young fella, and it was one of the best times of my life, actually, even though it was during the war, you know. When we were first there were planes coming in that had been assigned already. They were coming back, they even came back from England for servicing. And I remember the crews were very notable, you know, the pilots and the gunners and everybody. They were all kind of stuck together, and they were a pretty good group.
$14,000 aircraft were repaired and serviced for the United States Army Air Force, based across England. Aircraft that would be shot down. Aircraft in which 55,000 American pilots and crew would die. But aircraft that would prove pivotal to winning the war. One ship sent out from Langford earned a reputation above all others. The legendary long-range B-17, the Flying Fortress.
Because you know that enemy fighters will appear any minute. They know exactly where you are. They've been watching the stratosphere condense off your wingtips, giving you away in long trails of magnificent treachery. 6 o'clock, level, 2 more, 5, watch it.
There were a few times when I heard the angels sing, but I survived and never had to use a parachute. I sat on it for hundreds of hours and never had to use one. But when you're up there all by yourself, just you and God, it is pretty scary, really.
11 o'clock, high. Here he comes up.
There's an old saying that there's no atheists in foxholes, and I would say there's no atheists in the cockpit of a fighter plane.
He's going out. High. Got one out of the high squadron. Yep. No chance there.
Seen one B-17 that his wheels weren't down. This guy didn't make it. He came down before he hit the end of the runway, and there was one big explosion, and I just thought, there goes some mother's young boy, you know. You feel kind of choked up about it to see something like that. To see somebody that gets almost all the way back, you know, and dies on their own airfield like that, it's not an easy thing to take. It still gets to me.
My husband was on the crash crew, which meant if a plane crashed anywhere in the vicinity, he and several of the others would go out, and they were trained, in other words, to take anything off the airplane that was of value and put the fires out, of course, and get medical attention for the people. I never really saw him in action. at Langford Lodge. It was quite isolated at that time, and access to Langford was pretty well non-existent. I was invited up one time, but as far as seeing what we called over here the Quonset huts and the things that the airmen were living in, conditions were, let's say, Spartan. Earl and I had gone together for about 3 years. Of course, he had asked me to marry him many, many times, and so finally, I think he must have worn me down. I did say yes. Well, Earl was 25 just when we married, and I was 21. Sweet 21.
I suppose there was a lull, and then the Americans came into the war, and they took over the Plaza Ballroom, and that was all turned into a place for men to sleep and for eating and everything else, and I worked there. And brought home various Americans to my poor parents who never knew what was going to come up the drive. I took pity on all these poor characters. It was just a very busy place because boats coming in with American sailors on board used it, and then our 3 fellows that came to us, they came in from Langford Lodge. All that we knew of Americans we got from Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and various films. And when you heard them speaking, I mean, it was fascinating. You were in Hollywood. It really was, you know, that was the main attraction of the Americans.
The American Red Cross in Belfast, they had a lot of bands come there to play. And, what was the old boy who was lost over England? A plane crash. Glenn? Oh, come on. Glenn, can't remember his name. Glenn Miller. Oh, I loved him. And we did have quite a few very good American groups. There was one, the Jive Bombers, and they were very good. The Lockheed personnel, they were all in civilian clothes, and they all had their zoot suits, but they did love to jitterbug.
I can remember seeing Al Jolson. I eventually wound up giving my camel hair coat to the hat check girl. She wanted that coat in the worst way, and I was going to be leaving soon. And that was big in those days, a camel's hair coat.
I met Chappie in the chalet with my mother and father. Now, one remark that made me laugh, coming on the bus with another girl, her name was Faith Cook. And she said, "Are you going out tonight?" I said, "Yes, I'm going out with Chappie Revick." "Ooh, my mother wouldn't let me go out with either of those boys." "Oh, why?" "They've had experience." I don't know that I knew what she was talking about. And I said, "Well, he's nice. I'm going out with him." And we progressed and we got engaged. We had a lovely wedding. It was a very happy day, and it was the 6th of March, and it was like high summer.
I hadn't actually flown with Tiger Moth since 44, 45, something like that.
Up, up. So just stand straight up.
Yep.
He remembers everything.
Yep.
And slide down as best you can.
Yep, you're in.
You're in.
I think we both had the feeling of that things had gone on and we might have had the future together. For the first year or so, early 41, I kept in touch then.
I went off saying, I'd keep in touch. She was going to write to me and all the rest of it. And she gave me this studio portrait of herself to take with me. I stuck it in the back cover of the logbook with 4 bits of sellotape. That went with me all around the world. Pat's mother wrote to say that Pat was getting married. A letter to Australia, which I got about 6 months after she'd sent it. And that was it. And I didn't really want to see her, quite honestly. And I met another girl and married her the following year. That was it. And then, of course, we came to the present. And some mutual friends said, oh, did you hear that Chappie Rebick had died? That was her husband. And my wife had died almost exactly a year before that. I was a widower by then. So I rang her up and said, sorry to hear about Chappie. Took her out to lunch. And gradually we got closer and closer, really. And in the end, we got very close. She calls me her toy boy.
Well done.
Is that the hardest part, getting it out?
No, and he flew it just as well as he did in 1944 when he last flew a Tiger Moth. Flew it himself just as well.
I think I now need a, what's the word, congratulatory drink.
A large whiskey. Proud of him, Pat.
Go Sam.
Large whiskey, yeah.
Yes.
And why not?
That's my first time up in what, about 50 years?
50 years.